Last night's episode of The View erupted into a firestorm of raw, unfiltered truth that left jaws on the floor and social media ablaze. Ricky Gervais, the fearless British comedian known for torching Hollywood's sacred cows, didn't just spar with co-host Sunny Hostins. He dismantled her entire worldview in a confrontation so electric, it's already being called a cultural reckoning when Hostins branded comedy a tool of oppression and accused Gervais of cloaking bigotry and humor. He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned and stared her down and demanded say that again. What followed wasn't just a defense of comedy. It was a surgical strike against performative righteousness, exposing the hypocrisy festering at the heart of The View's sanctimonious stage. This wasn't about promoting Gervais' new Netflix special. It was about revealing the ugly truth of how daytime TV weaponized victimhood. For clicks and clout, buckle up, because this 5,000-word deep dive into the chaos will leave you stunned, inspired, and maybe even laughing. To the record's attention was palpable from the moment Gervais stepped into ABC's New York studio that morning at 52. The comedian, whose razor-sharp wit has made him a global icon since the Ambush Brewing producers, visibly on edge, handed him a list of trigger warnings and off-limits topics: religion, politics, identity. Essentially a gag order on comedy itself. One insider later spilled that a makeup artist overheard Hostins rallying her team Venom in her voice. This transphobic piece of garbage needs to be exposed. I don't care if he's funny. The trap was set before Gervais even sat down. Hostins, a former federal prosecutor turned daytime TV moralizer, had planned to make an example of him, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. Gervais has built a career shredding the self-righteous, from Golden Globes roasts to his boundary-pushing specials. This wasn't going to be a debate. It was going to be a demolition. Backstage, the atmosphere was suffocating. The warm-up comedian, under strict orders to keep things safe and inclusive, delivered a painfully unfunny set about coffee and whether the kind of bland drivel that makes you question why comedy exists. Meanwhile, Gervais sat quietly scribbling notes with the precision of a surgeon preparing to cut. He wasn't just observing The View's hypocrisy. He was cataloging it, ready to unleash a reckoning. The show opened with its usual fare, panel of hosts pontificating about the day's outrages, with Hostins leading the charge. Her signature blend of legal jargon and moral superiority dominated the airwaves as she railed against comedians who profit from pain and the violence of words. Joy Behar, ever the loyal psychic, nodded along, nervously aware of Gervais' reputation for verbal carnage. Whoopi Goldberg, a comedian herself, stayed eerily neutral, her silence a tightrope walk between self-preservation and respect for her craft. Hostins, however, was on a mission, framing Gervais as a villain who needed to be canceled before he even opened his mouth. By the time Whoopi introduced him, "Please welcome Ricky Gervais." The studio was a powder keg. The audience's reaction was a mixed bag. Some clapped enthusiastically, fans was irreverent humor. Others sat stone-faced, arms crossed, ready to pounce. Gervais strode out with his trademark swagger, casual but commanding like a lion stepping into a den of hyenas. He took his seat, deliberately scanning the hosts like a scientist studying a peculiar species. When his eyes locked on Hostins, he paused, a sly grin creeping across his face. "Sunny Hostins," he began, voice dripping with mock curiosity, "I Googled you, former federal prosecutor turned daytime TV personality. That's quite a downgrade, isn't?" The audience gasped, a few chuckles breaking the tension. Hostins bristled, her smile tight. "I'm proud of my career evolution." She shot back, defensive but poised. "Evolution," Gervais quipped, leaning forward. "You went from prosecuting criminals to prosecuting comedians. That's not evolution, love. That's devolution." The studio erupted in laughter, but Hostins' eyes narrowed. The battle lines were drawn. Hostins wasted no time launching her attack. "Your comedy hurts people, Ricky," she declared, her voice heavy with rehearsed indignation. "You mock trans individuals, disabled people, religious communities." Gervais didn't blink. "Say that again," he demanded, his tone sharp but calm. "Say I mock trans individuals. Give me one specific example, one actual quote where I mock trans people rather than discuss the discourse around trans issues." Go on. The challenge hung in the air like a guillotine. Hostins fumbled with her note cards, her confidence wavering. "Well, your entire special," she began, but Gervais cut her off. "You haven't watched it, have you?" he said, his voice a mix of amusement and disdain. "You've read tweets about it, you've seen clips out of context, but you haven't actually watched it, because if you had, you'd know I never mock trans people. I mock the ridiculous extremes of the debate. There's a difference, but that requires nuance, which daytime TV doesn't do." The audience murmured, some nodding, others squirming. Hostins was already on the ropes, and Gervais was just warming up. Joy Behar jumped in, trying to bail out her co-host. "But Ricky, you have to admit some of your jokes are offensive," she said, her tone half-hearted. Gervais turned to her, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Everything's offensive to someone. Joy, you've made jokes about Christians, Republican Southerners, are those not offensive? Or is it only offensive when you disagree with a target? Behar opened her mouth, then closed it, caught at her own logic. Gervais stood up his presence, suddenly commanding the entire studio. Hey, Race, what's really happening? He said, pointing at Hoskins. You discovered that outrage equals ratings, that victimhood equals virtue, that claiming offense give you power. So you made a career of it, but you're not actually offended, you're opportunistic. The accusation landed like a thunderbolt. Hoskins sputtered, how dare you? But Gervais was relentless. How dare I what point out your hypocrisy? You had Harvey Weinstein on this show and toss him softball. Questions you laugh at his jokes. But a comedian calling out Hollywood's hypocrisy, that's where you draw the line. The audience was buzzing now, some pulling out phones to record the chaos. Gervais wasn't just winning, he was rewriting the rules of the game. He pulled out his phone, holding it up like a weapon. Want to see something interesting? He asked, scrolling. These are tweets from you, Sonny. Jokes about white people, men, conservatives, generalizations, stereotypes, mockery. But that's not offensive, is it? Because you're on the right side. Hoskins' face flushed. That's completely different, she protested. But Gervais pounced. Say that again. He demanded, explain how your mockery is righteous. But mine is violence. Explain the difference without sounding like a hypocrite. Ill wait. The studio fell silent. The weight of his challenge crushing Hoskins. Couldn't answer, not without exposing her double standard. She was trapped, and Gervais knew it. But he wasn't done. He pulled out a piece of paper, his voice rising with purpose. This is interesting, he said, waving. It's the View's advertising demographics. Your audience is 92% white, middle-aged, upper-middle-class women. You're performing diversity for the least diverse audience on TV. You're selling wokeness to people who've never faced real oppression. That's not activism, love. That's theater. Whoopi sensing the car and to try to intervene. Ricky, that's not fair, she said, her voice strained. What's not fair? Whoopi grabbed his shot back, turned to her. You're a comedian. You know comedy requires risk. You know it pushes boundaries into territory that's not just unfair, it's cruel. Cruel. Joy actually laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed through the studio. Oh, please, Keanu, I'm asking legitimate questions that journalists should be asking. You want cruel? Cruel is manipulating people's emotions for a profit. Cruel is building a fake persona to sell movie tickets. That was the moment something shifted in Keanu's eyes. If you've ever seen him in interviews, you know he's the master of staying calm, even in the face of tough questions. He's weathered personal tragedies, losing his best friend, his daughter, his partner, his sister, with a grace that most people can only dream of. But Joy's words, her mocking tone, her insinuation that his kindness was all a sham, they hit a nerve. And for the first time in decades, the world was about to see Keanu Reeves push his limit. You want to talk about manipulation? Joy. Keanu's voice was still quiet, but now it carried a weight that made everyone in the studio lean forward. Let's talk about manipulation. The words hung in the air like a challenge, a quiet but unmistakable declaration of war. Keanu Reeves, a man who had spent his entire career avoiding confrontation, was now staring directly at Joy Behar with an intensity that made the entire studio hold its breath. You sit at this table every day, Keanu continued, his voice gaining strength with each word, and you tear people down for entertainment. You take someone's genuine attempt to do good in the world, and you twist it into something cynical and calculated, because that's what gets ratings, isn't it? Joy's smirk faltered slightly, but she wasn't ready to back down. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms defensively. I'm a journalist, Keanu, she shot back. I ask hard questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Hard questions. Keanu leaned forward, now his calm exterior starting to crack. You want to ask hard questions? Then ask me about the work, ask me about the craft, ask me about the stories we're trying to tell. But don't you dare sit there and question whether my grief is real, whether my desire to help people is genuine, whether the loss of my best friend, my daughter, my sister somehow made me a better person, or just a better actor. The mention of his personal losses sent a visible shockwave through the panel. Even Joy seemed momentarily taken aback, her eyes widening slightly as if she hadn't expected him to go there. The audience was silent, but you could feel their collective empathy, their respect for a man who had endured so much and still chosen kindness. But Joy, ever the provocateur, wasn't ready to let it go. Now you're being dramatic, she said, her voice tinged with defensiveness. I never mentioned your personal tragedies in talking about your public image, your brand. There's a difference.